This video is brought to you by slateblackindustries. For grip panels and other accessories, visit slateblackindustries.com.
Long have I waited.
Over the last few years, we've watched as various brands have released their 1-to-8 offerings, stretching the upper end magnification of the LPVO. And the Razor Gen II, although still considered one of the best rounded low-power variable optics for the price, began being doubted, at least by some, because of its perceived lack of top-end reach. Well, allow us to introduce you to the Razor Gen III, where Vortex made up for lost time by skipping the 8-power top end completely, jumping to a 10-power top magnification. Now, Vortex isn't the first to the 1-to-10 game. There are a few others who have attempted this extreme feat, but consider that a 10-power top end is what we're used to seeing paired with a 2.5-power low end, designed for DMR-style gas guns or even mid-range bolt guns. And appreciate that if Vortex has been able to pull this off, we're really talking about a new standard for optics. Let's start by framing the conversation. We're looking for three main functional components in an LPVO. The first is to facilitate speed on close-range targets, acting as close to a red dot as possible. Second, we're looking for the ability to easily and effectively alter magnification to clearly PID as range begins to extend. And lastly, we're looking for all possible advantages when firing at ranged targets, including graduated aiming and ranging assist. It's also relevant to identify the issues that optics tend to have when trying to hit these markers all in one package. Generally, everything works in trade-offs and compromises. If the optic excels in one area, it generally trades that for subpar performance in another. For example, if a reticle is great for close-range speed shooting, odds are it won't be the best at distance, or if the glass, for example, is crystal clear with a huge field of view, odds are the optic is large and heavy, compromising on speed and mobility. These extremes are amplified the wider the magnification range on LPVOs are pushed. So the balance of these generally opposing features are what we plan to cue in on most during this commentary. So let's start talking about what things look like through this optic. First of all, clarity is excellent. It has great glass and very strong light transmission. The clarity edge to edge is great, and there are no tints or hues detectable. The optic feels on par with what we saw out of the Gen II Razor and other premium optics of the price range. Even up at 10 power, the image looks excellent, especially under good, solid daylight, aided no doubt by the 34mm tube. The Eyebox is strong on this optic as well, similar to the Razor Gen II and Accupower from Nightforce. On 1 power, there's a good deal of forgiveness that's afforded to the shooter, making getting on the optic at speed no problem at all. We've heard people say it's better than these other optics, but we're not seeing that. It's in line. Up at max power, the Eyebox gets tight, as in, it's very tight. Now, this scales with magnification, so at 6 power, it's not really any different than the Gen II Razor, and at 8 power, it seems to align with the Accupower, with a slight advantage perhaps going to the Nightforce. At 10 power, it's tighter than on 8 power. So keep this in mind. Perhaps it won't always make sense to dial up to max magnification if attempting to secure a bit more forgiveness. Unlike other LPVOs in the 1-to-6 and even 1-to-8 range, with a 10-power top end, we're beginning to enter the realm of not always wanting to be at either min or max magnification for the majority of tasks. So keep that in mind as a consideration. The 10-power presents an option, not something that has to be used all the time. Next, we get to field of view, and this is an area where the Razor destroys its competition. The field of view on 1 power for this optic is the best we've seen out of a first focal plane LPVO up at 116 feet. Heck, that's better than almost all second focal plane LPVOs, including the Gen II. You have a massive field of view here. When coupled with the Eyebox, you're getting a great image on the low-end magnification settings. Now, as we approach max power, things obviously tighten up quite a bit, landing at 11.7 feet at 100 yards. And while that sounds tight, it's actually right in line with other 10 power top ends we see out of the likes of Nightforce, Leupold, and so on. This is worth reiterating. One of the best 1 power field of views and a perfectly acceptable inline top end field of view when compared to optics, which start at 2.5 power. So where's the trade-off? Well, the image on 1 power does feel a touch magnified, meaning it doesn't look like a perfectly flat image. It's only truly noticeable inside of 10 yards or so when sucked into the tube, but there is a touch of fishbowling and or again slight magnification. All things considered, as a shooter, I'll take this any day of the week. Now, on to the reticle. We opted for the mill reticle, although a BDC/MOA option does exist. Now, this is an area where Vortex appears to have, again, gotten things mostly right. You get a dot and donut in the dead center with a T-shaped overall layout and a mill-based grid for holdovers. This is very similar to what we saw out of the Nightforce 8 Tacker. On 1 power, the center dot and donut appears just as a red dot, with a thick black T-shaped stadia drawing the user's eye to the optic center. The T-shape is our preference for first focal plane optics, as it allows the user to bracket targets at the 25 to say 75 yard markers. The mill grid is basically invisible at this magnification. For a first focal plane optic, this is about as good as you're going to get in terms of speed and aiming capability up close with respect to the reticle. As we dial up the power, you'll note that the center dot and donut do get large in relation to the targets, but also notice that they are a touch translucent. Although it's difficult to capture through a camera, there is an obvious translucency of the center of the optic, a major advantage when aiming at targets between 250 and say 400 yards. Normally, such a reticle would obscure much of the target at those ranges, but the slight translucency helps to mitigate this issue. Further, unlike the Nightforce 1-8 optics, which maintain a 0.35 mil center dot, the Gen III Razor dot is only 0.2 mils in diameter, allowing for more precise aiming and zeroing, although still not quite as refined as a chevron-style aiming point. You'll also see that the mill grid becomes perfectly visible and usable at about 5 power and obviously maintains that distinction up through max magnification. Further, Vortex has added a ranging feature at the top of the reticle. It's very much out of the way and doesn't obscure the user's vision, but it's also very much far and out of the way, so if you did need to range a target, there would be a good deal of sight movement to get back to a firing solution. Overall, the reticle for use at range works quite well. That said, it doesn't feel perfect necessarily. The mill grid specifically feels a bit awkward in terms of the alignment of the numeric designators and the number of mill holds for wind. You'll notice that the grid does not open smoothly and evenly as it drops due to the number of wind holds provided not being consistently increased with the elevation increases. At first we thought we might just be nitpicking here, but the more we compare it against the Griffin mill from Primary Arms and how it handled its mill grid system, we realize we truly are partial to the consistency of that reticle grid. There appears to be a bit more usability, at least for our purposes, out of that specific grid setup. The same goes for the placement and methodology of the ranging capability. While the Razor includes a target height ranging feature, which is more than can be said of most LPVOs, the Griffin mill just does seem to do it better. And to be fair, better than pretty much any other LPVO reticle out there from what we've seen to this point. Again, just a consideration based on looking through these optics side by side. Let's talk about some of the other features of this optic now. Illumination is easily daylight visible. A nice vibrant dot that shines through even direct sunlight will be found on the max setting. While the reticle itself doesn't require illumination to be usable up close, it certainly helps for a flash sight picture. Now, only the center dot and donut are illuminated, much like in the Nightforce optics, and to be honest, the majority of LPVOs. So if you're attempting to shoot a low contrast target with the mill grid, there can be some issues in trying to negotiate a precise shot at range. The illumination control is very similar to the Gen II Razor, with a very knurled knob that has off positions between settings and a locking feature to keep things from moving inadvertently. The turrets on the Razor are both capped. Generally, we prefer capped turrets on LPVOs, But in the case of a 10 power top end, we understand why some users have provided feedback that a lockable exposed turret should have been included. For our purposes, it isn't a make or break thing, but especially due to the center dot being fairly refined at only 0.2 mils, we could see why such a turret would have been valuable. The turrets do adjust in 0.1 mil increments to allow for a refined zero. Next, we'll talk power adjustment. One of the major downsides to the Gen II Razor was its very stiff power ring and lack of included power lever. Well, consider both issues solved. The Gen III Razor has an extremely smooth power adjustment, most akin to that on the NX8, which was obviously one of our praised features on that optic. To make things better, they've included a power adjustment ring with the optic, which makes snapping from min to max extremely easy. So powering up, down, and anywhere in between is simple and easy, a major benefit for PID, or gaining a bit of advantage going from close range to mid-range targets. And lastly, we'll cover footprint. Another negative of the Gen II Razor was its beefy weight, partially remedied in the E model. So how does the Gen III stack up? Well, considering all of the features we've already talked about, we were expecting at least a 1.5 pound optic. Nope. The Gen 3 weighs in at just 21.5 ounces. That's right, matching the weight of the Nightforce 8 Tacker, which, as those who have seen our review of that optic will already know, is one of the lightest 1 to 8 power optics on the market. Absolutely killer work on the footprint here, maintaining this optic is a viable choice for a huge range of firearms. So where does this leave us? Well, we've got great glass, great eyebox, great field of view, a great low-end reticle, a good high magnification reticle, great illumination, great power adjustment, and great footprint. The only real knocks in terms of performance we could chalk up here were the slight fishbowling at 1 power and the reticle at high magnification being less optimal for our purposes than one of the best out there. So how much does this bad boy run? Because with a resume like that, this optic could easily be marked in at 2,500 plus. Well, this one is available on the street between 1,900 and 2,100 bucks. Certainly not a cheap optic by any means, but when we consider the overall performance we're seeing out of such an optic and what is comparatively available in that price range, well, it's hard for us not to gravitate toward the burnt bronze beauty. Oh, that's right, the only color option is the Razor line standard brown. So, we hope you enjoyed a look down an optic that very well may change the game for LPVOs and optic choices in general. You've been watching 9-Hole Reviews brought to you by Slate Black Industries, and until next time, we'll see you on the range.
716 is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green, how copy, over.
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over. 1 Steel 91, 1 pack,